The sound hit like a sonic boom, three sharp, merciless blasts that shattered the Sunday morning quiet of Maple Grove Estates. Margaret Holloway's fingers froze mid-type on her laptop keyboard, the half-drafted complaint email to the HOA board momentarily forgotten. Outside her perfectly manicured window, a massive industrial siren wailed from her next-door neighbor's yard, its piercing shriek ricocheting between meticulously maintained Tudor-style homes. The noise was deliberate, calculated. A declaration of war that would make even the most battle-hardened HOA board member tremble. And it was all her fault. Margaret, known to her neighbors as the HOA Karen, had finally pushed someone too far. For years, she'd been the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, wielding the HOA rulebook like a medieval weapon. Her clipboard was her shield, her email account her battering ram. No deviation from community standards went unnoticed, no minor infraction escaped her scrutiny. But Derek Reynolds, the rebellious engineer who'd moved in 6 months ago, was different. Where other neighbors cowered beneath her passive-aggressive emails and formal warnings, he seemed to view her attacks as an intricate chess game. Each of her complaints was met with surgical precision, each rule challenged with a level of bureaucratic judo that left her momentarily stunned. The Windmill had been her latest target, a massive industrial-looking wind turbine that Derek had installed in his backyard, supposedly to generate alternative energy. Margaret knew better. This was a provocation. A middle finger to the carefully curated aesthetic of Maple Grove Estates, where uniformity was not just encouraged, it was mandated. Her first complaint had been a masterpiece of HOA speak. She'd cited Section 7.3, subsection C of the neighborhood bylaws, which clearly stated that external mechanical structures shall maintain architectural harmony with surrounding properties. The Windmill, with its gleaming metallic blades and industrial base, stuck out like a punk rocker at a country club tea party. Derek's response had been equally brilliant. He'd submitted a detailed engineering report demonstrating the turbine's compliance with local renewable energy ordinances, complete with wind speed calculations, energy output projections, and a line-by-line rebuttal of her interpretation of the HOA bylaws. But this siren was something else entirely. Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. The neighborhood was awake now, windows opening, confused faces peering out, dogs barking in a cacophonous chorus that matched the industrial wail. Her carefully constructed world of perfect hedges and pristine mailboxes was unraveling, one ear-splitting second at a time. Little did she know this was just the beginning of a neighborhood conflict that would become legendary, a battle that would transform Maple Grove Estates from a quiet suburban enclave into a battleground of bureaucratic warfare, individual rebellion, and unexpected alliances. The siren continued to wail, a sonic middle finger to everything Margaret represented. Derek Reynolds leaned back in his ergonomic home office chair, a hint of a smile playing across his lips as he listened to the aftermath of his sonic protest. The emergency HOA meeting would be called within hours. Of that he was certain. His windmill stood like a mechanical sentinel in the backyard, its industrial silhouette a stark contrast to the cookie-cutter landscape of Maple Grove Estates. An electrical engineering PhD and former defense contractor, Derek wasn't just any homeowner. He was a strategist who saw Margaret Holloway's repeated attacks as more than personal. They were a systemic problem of suburban conformity. The first complaint had arrived precisely 3 weeks after he moved in. A pristine white envelope typed with military precision, detailing how his trash cans were positioned 2.3 inches outside the prescribed storage area. Then came the issue with his landscape lighting. Apparently, the cool-toned LED lights didn't match the warm amber aesthetic of the neighborhood. But the Windmill was different. It represented something more than just renewable energy. It was a statement of individual freedom, a technological middle finger to suburban mediocrity. His phone buzzed. The first of many incoming texts and emails, no doubt. Sarah Mitchell from 2 doors down sent a message. "What the hell was that noise, Derek?" He chuckled, typing back a simple response, addressing a local noise complaint. The irony wasn't lost on him. Margaret had consistently complained about the Windmill's supposedly excessive noise, minimal decibels that barely registered above ambient neighborhood sounds. So today he'd given her exactly what she claimed to hate: noise. The siren was carefully calibrated. Connected to his custom-built electronic system, it was programmed to activate at specific intervals, triggered by a complex algorithm that monitored Margaret's property. Motion sensors, email tracking, and some delightfully complex coding ensured maximum disruption with minimal direct involvement. In the defense industry, they called this a precision psychological operation. In suburban Maple Grove, it was about to become legendary. Derek pulled up the neighborhood bylaws on his dual monitor setup. He memorized every section, every subsection. Where Margaret saw rules as rigid boundaries, he saw them as intricate puzzles to be solved, challenged, and occasionally exploited. His military background had taught him that the most effective battles were won through intelligence, preparation, and an understanding of your opponent's psychology. Margaret Holloway was predictable. Her responses coded into her very personality like a complex software algorithm. She would escalate. She would call an emergency HOA meeting. She would draft increasingly complex complaints. And he would be ready. The windmill's blades caught the morning sunlight, spinning with a rhythm that seemed to whisper defiance. Derek knew this was more than a personal vendetta. It was a statement about individual rights, about challenging the suffocating conformity of suburban life. Outside, the neighborhood was stirring. Whispers would become conversations. Conversations would become accusations. And at the center of it all would be one simple question. Who exactly was pushing the boundaries of acceptable behavior? The Siren's echo had only just begun. The Maple Grove Estates Community Center looked like a war room. Folding chairs were arranged in military-precise rows, each occupied by a resident with the tense anticipation of spectators at a championship boxing match. Margaret Holloway sat front and center, her power suit pressed within an inch of its life, meticulously organized file folders stacked before her like defensive fortifications. Emergency HOA meetings were her specialty. She lived for these moments, a parliamentary procedure, the opportunity to cite bylaws, the chance to assert her authority over every minute detail of neighborhood life. But something felt different this time. The usual nervous shuffling and deferential glances were replaced by a current of electricity, a subtle current of rebellion. The matter at hand, Margaret began, her voice cutting through the murmur like a freshly sharpened knife, is the egregious violation of community standards by Mr. Derek Reynolds. She clicked a remote and a presentation flickered to life. Photographs of the windmill dominated the screen, each image carefully annotated with measurements, potential code violations, and aesthetic critiques. It was Margaret at her absolute finest. Death by bureaucratic detail. But the room was different today. Tom Harrison, a retired software engineer who previously nodded along with Margaret's every proclamation, raised his hand. "I'm curious," he interrupted, "about the actual energy savings Derek's implemented." It was a small rebellion, but a significant one. Margaret's perfectly maintained smile flickered. Tom had never questioned her before. Her gaze swept the room, searching for her usual allies. Barbara from the cul-de-sac. Frank, a retired postal worker. The faces that typically supported her crusade now looked interested, engaged, questioning. Derek sat near the back, watching with the calm precision of a chess grandmaster. He prepared for this moment meticulously. Mounted on the wall behind him was a detailed infographic showing the windmill's energy production, its environmental impact, and, most crucially, its compliance with every single local and HOA regulation. The Siren incident had done more than just annoy the neighborhood. It transformed the dynamic of Maple Grove Estates. Margaret's fingers gripped her file folders, her security blanket of bureaucratic control. She'd spent years cultivating this community as her personal fiefdom. Rules were her currency, compliance her ultimate goal. But Derek had found the exploit in her system, the vulnerability in her carefully constructed world of suburban control. "If I may," Derek spoke up, his voice calm and measured, "I'd like to address the concerns about noise and aesthetic impact." The room went silent, not the uncomfortable silence Margaret was accustomed to, where people waited for her to speak. This was different. This was the silence of genuine curiosity. Margaret realized with a sinking feeling that she was no longer entirely in control. The windmill outside seemed to spin just a little faster, its blades catching the evening light like a technological harbinger of change. Something was shifting in Maple Grove Estates, and Margaret Holloway was about to find herself in the fight of her life. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was like a slow-burning fuse. Margaret Holloway didn't lose battles. She strategically regrouped. Her home office became a war room, bulletin boards covered with color-coded notes, printed emails, and meticulously annotated HOA bylaws. Derek Reynolds had exposed something she couldn't tolerate: vulnerability. Her computer screen flickered with research, solar panel regulations, wind turbine ordinances, historical precedents of HOA disputes. She cross-referenced everything, hunting for the slightest legal inconsistency that might clip Derek's technological wings. The neighborhood was changing, and Margaret refused to be a passive observer. Her first counterattack arrived via certified mail, a 17-page document detailing potential zoning violations, historical preservation concerns, and electromagnetic interference risks. Each paragraph was a precision-guided missile of bureaucratic warfare, footnoted with academic citations and local municipal codes. Derek's response came electronically, a meticulously crafted PDF that systematically dismantled every single one of her claims: engineering reports, energy efficiency calculations, historical precedents of innovative residential energy solutions. He'd anticipated her move before she even made it. But Margaret wasn't finished. She began cultivating allies. Barbara from the cul-de-sac received a carefully worded email about neighborhood property values. Frank, the retired postal worker, got a detailed breakdown of how non-standard architectural elements could impact community aesthetics. Divide and conquer, her specialty. The neighborhood began to split. Some residents found Derek's windmill fascinating. Others saw it as an eyesore. Dinner parties became battlegrounds of passive-aggressive commentary. Neighborhood group chats buzzed with speculation and side-taking. Derek, meanwhile, continued playing a deeper game. He'd installed additional environmental monitoring equipment alongside his windmill, solar panels that blended more seamlessly with the roofline, a rainwater collection system that was virtually invisible. Each modification was a calculated move designed to address potential complaints before they could be filed. Margaret's clipboard became her constant companion. She measured, she photographed, she documented every minutiae of Derek's property with the precision of a forensic investigator. The windmill continued to spin. Its blades caught sunlight with a defiant gleam, a mechanical sentinel that represented more than just alternative energy. It was a symbol of resistance against suburban conformity, against the suffocating sameness that Margaret had enforced for years. Something fundamental was changing in Maple Grove Estates. The carefully maintained facade of uniformity was cracking, revealing the complex human dynamics beneath. Margaret had always believed rules were absolute. Derek was proving they were anything but. Each rotation of the windmill's blades felt like a countdown to what neither of them could yet predict. The legal notice arrived on a Thursday, crisp, official, with the kind of heavyweight paper that suggested serious consequences. Derek recognized the letterhead immediately. Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association official legal correspondence. Margaret had escalated. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic warfare. 12 pages detailing potential violations, each paragraph more intricate than the last. She was demanding the complete removal of the windmill, citing a labyrinth of technical regulations that would make most homeowners surrender immediately. But Derek wasn't most homeowners. His military background had taught him that the most effective battles were won through intelligence, preparation, and an understanding of your opponent's psychology. Margaret Holloway was predictable, her responses coded into her very personality like a complex software algorithm. He'd anticipated this move weeks ago. The windmill was more than just an energy solution. It was a statement, a technological rebellion against the suffocating conformity of suburban life. Each modification was a carefully planned chess move designed to checkmate Margaret's attempts at control. His phone buzzed. Tom Harrison from 2 doors down, the retired software engineer who'd begun to see Derek as an unexpected ally. "Did you see the notice?" Tom's text read. "Working on it," Derek replied. The neighborhood was watching. What had started as a simple dispute had become a referendum on individual expression versus community control. Neighbors who previously hid behind perfectly manicured hedges were now taking sides. Margaret's strategy was clear: legal pressure, financial intimidation, death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. But Derek had been preparing. His response would be surgical. He began assembling his defense: technical reports from renewable energy experts, historical precedents of HOA challenges, economic impact studies showing the potential benefits of residential wind energy. Each document was a precision-guided missile aimed at the heart of Margaret's argument. The windmill continued to spin, its blades catching the afternoon light like a mechanical middle finger to suburban conformity. In his home office, surrounded by monitors displaying complex engineering diagrams and legal documents, Derek smiled. Margaret believed she was fighting for neighborhood standards. He knew the truth was far more complex. This was about more than a windmill. It was about the right to be different, the freedom to challenge the status quo, to introduce innovation in a world that preferred comfortable sameness. Outside, the first whispers of neighborhood support began to circulate. Subtle at first, a knowing glance, a supportive text message, a raised eyebrow at the HOA meeting. Something was changing in Maple Grove Estates. Margaret had awakened a force she didn't understand. Individual spirit doesn't surrender easily, especially when cornered. The legal battle was just beginning. The local municipal building felt like neutral ground, a battlefield where bureaucracy met innovation. Derek sat at the hearing table, his engineering portfolio spread out like battle plans. Margaret occupied the adjacent seat, her power suit pressed within an inch of its life, clipboard clutched like a shield. Municipal hearings were supposed to be dry affairs. This was anything but. The room buzzed with an electricity that had nothing to do with Derek's windmill. Neighbors packed the benches. Some wore t-shirts, subtly sporting wind turbine designs. Others brought technical documentation, their own amateur research into renewable energy. Margaret had miscalculated. What she'd intended as a surgical strike against Derek had transformed into a neighborhood referendum on individual expression, technological innovation, and the very nature of community standards. Tom Harrison, the retired software engineer who'd become Derek's unexpected ally, had been instrumental. He'd rallied tech-savvy residents, compiled research, drawn attention to the broader implications of Margaret's crusade. The municipal board representative, Sandra Rodriguez, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. These hearings typically involved mundane zoning disputes or fence height controversies. This was different. "Mr. Reynolds," Sandra began, "your windmill has generated significant community discussion." An understatement if there ever was one. Derek's presentation was a masterpiece of technical precision and strategic storytelling. Energy output calculations, environmental impact assessments, cost savings projections, but more importantly, he framed it as a human story about innovation, about challenging outdated thinking, about the right to experiment and improve. Margaret's counterargument felt increasingly desperate. Her meticulously prepared documents now seemed like relics of a bygone era, rigid, inflexible, desperately clinging to a vision of suburban life that was rapidly becoming obsolete. The neighborhood had changed. What began as a simple dispute about a windmill had become something more. A referendum on progress, on individual rights, on the very definition of community. Whispers circulated. Smartphone screens displayed technical diagrams. Residents who'd previously been silent were now engaged, discussing renewable energy, municipal codes, individual property rights. Derek understood something Margaret never would. True community isn't about uniformity. It's about respect, about allowing space for individual expression while maintaining a collective spirit. The windmill outside seemed to spin with additional purpose. Each rotation was a statement, a technological declaration of independence. Margaret's grip on her clipboard tightened. She entered this hearing confident of victory. Now she wasn't so sure. The municipal board was preparing to deliberate. The room held its collective breath. In Maple Grove Estates, everything was about to change. The decision came 3 days later, delivered not through official channels, but through a cascade of neighborhood whispers and digital notifications that spread faster than wildfire. Derek received the first call from Tom Harrison at 6:17 a.m., his voice crackling with barely contained excitement. "You won," Tom said, "but that's not even the half of it." The municipal board hadn't just approved the windmill. They'd done something unprecedented. Margaret Holloway sat in her meticulously organized home office, surrounded by years of collected HOA documentation, watching her carefully constructed world crumble. The official recommendation wasn't just a victory for Derek. It was a complete reimagining of neighborhood regulations. The board had issued a comprehensive review of Maple Grove Estates bylaws. Outdated restrictions were being systematically dismantled. Solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicle charging stations, all now pre-approved with minimal bureaucratic interference. Her phone began to ring. Constantly. Neighbors who had once deferred to her now called with a mixture of excitement and mild mockery. Barbara from the cul-de-sac. Frank, the retired postal worker. Each call chipped away at Margaret's carefully maintained facade of control. Derek's windmill had become more than just a personal statement. It was a catalyst for neighborhood transformation. The technological revolution wasn't just coming to Maple Grove Estates, it had arrived. Residents began sharing plans for their own renewable energy projects. Tom Harrison was organizing a neighborhood tech innovation group. Young families who'd been considering moving suddenly saw the community in a new light. Margaret understood with a sinking feeling that she'd become obsolete. Her decades of meticulously enforced conformity were being replaced by a dynamic, forward-thinking approach to community living. The rigid boundaries she maintained were dissolving, replaced by a more collaborative, innovative spirit. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her relentless pursuit of Derek had ultimately destroyed the very system of control she spent years building. Outside her window, the neighborhood looked different. Solar panels glinted on rooftops. Electric vehicle charging stations appeared in driveways. Conversations on front porches buzzed with technological excitement. Derek's windmill continued to spin, no longer a rebellious statement, but a symbol of something larger. A community reimagining itself, breaking free from outdated constraints, embracing change. Margaret's clipboard sat untouched. Her file folders seemed like relics of a bygone era. The last text message came from an unexpected source, the HOA board itself. The formal notification requesting her resignation, couched in bureaucratic language that felt like a final surgical cut. Maple Grove Estates had chosen its future, and Margaret Holloway was not part of it. The neighborhood that had once been a monument to suburban conformity now buzzed with innovation. Derek's windmill stood as a kind of technological monument, no longer a rebellion, but a blueprint for community transformation. Margaret Holloway had disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated she'd moved to a retirement community in Florida or perhaps to another suburban development where she might resurrect her reign of bureaucratic control. But nobody knew for certain. Tom Harrison had taken over the HOA board, implementing a radically transparent approach to neighborhood management. Community meetings now happen online, with real-time voting and open discussions. The rigid rulebook had been replaced by collaborative guidelines that emphasized innovation and individual expression. Derek's original Windmill had inspired a neighborhood-wide renewable energy initiative. Solar panels appeared like technological blossoms across rooftops. Electric vehicle charging stations became as common as mailboxes. The community had transformed from a bastion of conformity to a model of progressive urban living. The siren that had once been Derek's weapon of bureaucratic warfare now sat disconnected, a reminder of the battle that had changed everything. Young families began moving into Maple Grove Estates, attracted by its reputation for innovation and community spirit. Tech workers, engineers, creative professionals saw the neighborhood as something more than just a place to live. It was a canvas for reimagining suburban life. During the annual neighborhood block party, Derek found himself surrounded by neighbors who now saw him not as a rebel, but as a catalyst. The windmill in his backyard had become a point of pride, a conversation starter, a symbol of what was possible when individual creativity met community support. Tom Harrison raised a glass of locally brewed craft beer, another innovation that would have been unthinkable under Margaret's regime. To progress, he toasted and the crowd cheered. The neighborhood that had once been defined by its perfectly trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes now celebrated its differences. Diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was embraced. Technology wasn't feared, it was welcomed. Derek's windmill continued to spin, its blades catching the evening light. No longer a statement of rebellion, but a beacon of possibility. Maple Grove Estates had found something more powerful than uniformity. It had discovered community. And somewhere, Margaret Holloway, whatever she was doing, would never know how profoundly her attempt to maintain control had ultimately led to true transformation.